Okay, let's jump right into this deep dive. You've sent us a stack of sources that really are something else.
Yeah. They propose this novel technology and then, well, they take us on quite a ride with its claimed applications.
That's putting it mildly. So, at its heart, we're looking at a specific geophysical technology, right? For exploring deep underground.
Exactly. Possibly even deeper than we can typically manage right now.
And this involves using electromagnetic waves. And there's an algorithm involved too, called RALF-1.
That's the one. But honestly, the most compelling part, and frankly kind of surprising, is how these sources claim his capabilities stretch way beyond that.
Into areas that seem completely unrelated to, poking around under the ground.
Totally unrelated. It's quite something.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to try and distill this down for you, the listener. We'll explore the core technology, look at these really ambitious claims about depth and precision first.
Makes sense.
Then we'll dive into that extraordinary, really surprising scope of claimed capabilities beyond geophysics. And finally, we'll look at the specific real-world projects and the pretty complex international connections described in these sources.
Sounds like a solid plan. Let's start deep then with the core tech and its claims for subsurface sensing. How exactly does it propose to look so far down?
Okay, right. So the sources mention the skin effect. It's a principle in electromagnetism. Basically, put simply, it means lower frequency electromagnetic waves can penetrate further into the Earth before their energy just, dissipates.
Right, so that's the theoretical basis they're offering for achieving that kind of depth.
Exactly. But they don't just talk theory. The claims are quite specific.
Oh yeah, how specific?
They're talking about sensing from the surface, 0 all the way down to 10 kilometers, and they state this capability is actually proved at that depth.
10 kilometers, wow, that is substantial.
It really is, and the precision claims are equally bold. The sources state it can identify underground features.
Like specific geological layers.
Yeah, like layers containing hydrocarbons or maybe highly saline water, with an accuracy down to the first meters of thickness.
Meters. At 10 kilometers deep.
That's the claim. Meters at 10 kilometers.
That's the core, almost jaw-dropping claim about the technology's capability right there. I mean, just to give you some perspective, identifying something just a few meters thick when it's 10,000 meters below you, that's an extraordinary technical challenge.
Right. And central to actually processing the signals they supposedly get from these depths is this algorithm they call RALF-1.
Ah, yes, RALF-1. Its full name, according to the sources, is Reflection on Action of Lorentz Forces 1.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. They describe it as a software implementation. Basically, a mathematical mapping of the compact action of Lorentz forces into a compact property of a physical body or space.
So Lorentz forces, those are the fundamental forces acting on charges, right?
Correct. And the algorithm is somehow mapping the action of these forces related to whatever body or space is being sensed. It's a bit abstract in the description.
So its main job is processing the geophysical data. What's it looking for?
It's particularly targeting hydrocarbon reserves, especially in hard formations like granite, which, is traditionally very tough to explore for oil and gas.
Right, not your typical sedimentary rock.
Exactly. And it also aims to model the subsurface fluid content predictively.
Okay. And do we know anything about the technical side? How it works under the hood?
Well, looking at the details mentioned in the sources, and there's some code analysis referenced, it seems to involve pretty advanced signal processing. Uses techniques like Fourier transforms for filtering, frequency analysis. That's all essential if you're trying to pull faint signals from deep underground.
Standard tools for complex signals, then?
Yeah, but maybe applied in a novel way. It also apparently uses randomization. They mentioned something called FastRAN63 and employs parallel processing. Which makes sense. You likely need that to handle the massive data sets you'd expect from deep sensing efficiently.
Okay, so sophisticated signal processing. But applying these tools successfully to get meters level precision at 10 kilometers, that's where the claim becomes so significant.
Precisely. As you mentioned, the sources specifically state the algorithm's precision for calculating hydrocarbon or saline water saturation is 2 meters. They really emphasize meters at 10 kilometers.
And how does it supposedly identify hydrocarbons?
It identifies potential signs by looking for a specific combination of 3 electrical signatures. First, increased local resistivity, how much the material resists electrical flow.
Okay.
Second, reduced polarization, how the material's electrical charges align. And third, increased resistivity anisotropy, basically, how electrical resistance varies depending on the direction you measure it.
So it's searching for this specific electrical fingerprint deep underground.
That's the idea.
Now, here's where things take a turn towards the abstract. And honestly, it's quite fascinating. The sources introduce this analogy for RALF-1, the concept of an observer.
Ah, yes, that part. It's framed by suggesting that just like observation can influence the outcome in quantum physics, they actually mention Thomas Young's double slit experiment as an example.
Right, the classic quantum weirdness.
Yeah. They suggest the RALF-1 algorithm somehow acts as an observer in its analysis, and this influences the insights it derives from the data.
That seems like quite a conceptual leap from standard data processing. I mean, usually we think of algorithms as just following deterministic steps to find patterns, right? Not acting as an observer that somehow shapes the result.
Exactly. The sources present this as a characteristic of the algorithm, but they don't really provide deep technical detail on how an algorithm computationally functions as an observer in this sense. It's mostly the analogy.
Okay. And this observer algorithm, according to the sources, is guided by another principle, Occam's razor.
Right. The idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best one.
So how do they claim that works within the algorithm? Is it like choosing the simplest geological model?
The idea, as presented, is that the algorithm uses this principle internally to discard, say, redundant parameters or overly complex interpretations of noise. It tries to find the most straightforward solution that fits the data. Think of it like trying to find the simplest, clearest path through a really complex, noisy map.
Okay, so it's trying to cut through the complexity based on a principle of simplicity. But like the observer concept, the sources don't really give us the technical nuts and bolts, do they?
No, not really. They don't detail how this principle of Occam's razor is actually implemented in the code to discard parameters in a way that reliably guarantees finding the correct, simplest solution in messy, real-world data. It feels more like an abstract guiding philosophy for the algorithm's design rather than a defined technical process, at least based on what we have.
Okay, so just to recap for you listening, we start with this proposed deep sensing technology, claiming unprecedented depth and precision using, well, established physics principles, but maybe pushed to the limit, plus advanced signal processing.
Then we have this algorithm, RALF-1, which is framed with these quite abstract concepts like observer effects and Occam's razor.
Right, and now here's where it gets really surprising, because the sources don't stop at geophysics, not by a long shot.
No, they don't. This is arguably the most extraordinary part of the whole stack of material. The sources claim RALF-1 has predictive capabilities across an astonishingly diverse range of applications, fields that seem completely disconnected from sensing the Earth's subsurface.
It's kind of mind-boggling. We're talking fields like financial markets.
Financial markets.
Seriously.
Seriously. The sources claim it can predict cryptocurrency prices, oil prices. There's even a specific claim about predicting a black swan event, the 2019 Saudi drone attack, based on analysis supposedly done before it happened.
Wait, hang on. From finding oil underground to predicting a major geopolitical market shock. How could the same algorithm possibly do both? What's the proposed link? Well, that's what the sources claim. They seem to suggest the algorithm's core function is finding discrepancies or local heterogeneities in complex systems, and that this ability applies broadly not just to geology.
Okay. What else?
They also list meteorology, predicting atmospheric phenomena. One example given was supposedly a prediction related to the San Andreas fault activity that allegedly differed from NOAA's forecast but proved correct later.
Wow. Okay. Finance, weather. What else?
Medicine. They mention potential applications for predicting cell growth, specifically aiming to predict cancer recurrence. One source references research on immune pathways in breast and prostate cancer, framing it as an area where this kind of predictive modeling is really needed.
From geology to oncology. That's quite a jump.
It is. And then, startlingly, military events.
Military.
Yeah. The sources claim the ability to predict the intensity of such bombings, as well as to determine the main areas for which these bombings will be carried out soon, specifically in the context of Russian bombing of Ukrainian territory.
That's an incredibly specific and, frankly, sensitive claim. Is there any backing for that in the sources?
Well, what's notable here is that one source does include a copy of a letter, apparently from the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Okay.
It acknowledges receiving an electronic appeal, which proposed using these algorithms for predicting bombing of Ukrainian territory. The letter just states their concern for national security regarding such matters. So the source reports the acknowledgement but doesn't offer further comment or validation itself. We're just relaying what's in the material.
Understood. Impartial reporting.
Yep.
But still, the claim itself is huge.
Huge. And the claims extend even further. They propose the algorithm for studying Earth and the universe to predict and react to global threats. We're talking meteorites, earthquakes, floods, even pole shifts, wars, epidemics, famine, crime, the list goes on.
It sounds like they're positioning it as a sort of universal prediction engine for any complex system.
That seems to be the implication. And let's not forget planetary exploration. There's a concept mentioned for sensing inside cosmic bodies.
Like Mars.
Exactly, including a remote sensing idea for finding water or energy on Mars using low-frequency lasers and ground reception, claiming similar depth and saturation accuracy as the Earth-based claims.
Okay, so it's a massive leap, isn't it? From finding oil or gas deep underground to suggesting the same algorithm, RALF-1, can somehow predict stock market movements, weather events, cancer growth, or military strikes.
It really is. I think the core insight for you, the listener, from this section is the sheer audacity and breadth of this claimed predictive power. The underlying suggestion seems to be that the algorithm is a kind of general discrepancy finder applicable to any complex system.
Which is a claim that absolutely screams for rigorous, independent, external validation.
Couldn't agree more. But let's circle back for a moment to where the technology is supposedly rooted deep Earth sensing and look at some of the specific real-world projects and connections mentioned in the sources.
Okay, back to Earth.
One key focus mentioned is finding hydrocarbons in hard rock formations. Now, this is actually a really big deal in geology.
Yeah, because usually you find petroleum and gas in sedimentary basins, right?
Yeah.
Finding commercial quantities in crystalline basement rock like granite or gabbro, that's pretty rare and technically challenging.
Exactly. It's often considered a major plot twist, as the sources put it, in conventional thinking about where energy resources might be.
But the sources point out that such deposits have indeed been found globally. They're not just theoretical flukes.
And they use a specific example quite heavily, the White Tiger or Bok Ho field in Vietnam.
Ah, yes, Bok Ho. That's a well-known, if unusual, field.
Right. And the sources highlight its incredibly high flow rates. They mention over 1,000 tons per day, even specifically citing 2,830 tons per day from a single well at one point.
Oh, wow.
From granite at a significant depth, 300 and 150 meters. So this serves as a kind of powerful analog for the potential they see elsewhere using their methods.
Okay, so where else are they looking? Ukraine seems to be a major focus in these materials.
Yes, Ukraine is presented as a key geographical focus for applying these methods, specifically targeting the potential for oil and gas from these granite formations, similar to Bok Ho.
Any specific areas mentioned?
They highlight the Rava-Ruska epeurogenic zone in the Lviv region. They say it's structurally analogous to the White Tiger field, sitting along a major fault line. The Boyarka area is also mentioned for a potential, maybe in the transition zone near the granites.
Okay. And are there specific projects underway or proposed?
Well, what really stands out is a detailed description of something called the Beliski Block Investment Project. It's by a company named JSC SBC Ukrna Invest, located in the Odessa region.
And what's the focus there?
Oil and gas production, naturally. But the sources detail its proximity to crucial infrastructure railway lines, Danube port, storage depots. They even mention an agreement with a refinery in Kherson.
Sounds like they've thought about the logistics.
It seems so, but the project description in the sources also notes a need for significant external financing, around $134 million.
Not small change.
Not at all. And interestingly, they connect this potential for localized oil extraction, perhaps even within or near cities like Kyiv or Lviv, to Ukraine's energy security.
How so?
They frame it as a strategic advantage because localized production avoids the vulnerability of having large-scale storage facilities that could be targeted during attacks. Small, dispersed production might be more resilient.
It's an interesting strategic angle in the current context. The sources also provide some historical background, mentioning development in Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, they touch on the development of geoelectric methods in Russia and Ukraine, sort of dating back to the 1970s through the 2010s. And they mention one individual, Vadim Chernov, as being involved in this history.
Okay, so a history there. What about outside Ukraine and Russia?
Exploration using this method is mentioned in the sources as having been conducted elsewhere, specifically in Russia, West Siberia, and the Krasnodar region, and also in Iran in the Dedasht region, apparently leading to oil findings, according to these documents.
And I think there's a mention of Pakistan, too.
Yes. Potential application in Pakistan's northern granite formations, like the Kohistan-Ladakh Arc and the Karakoram Range that's suggested, based apparently on the design of the code itself.
Right. Now, there's this other kind of unexpected international thread running through the sources connecting some of these individuals to the Philippines.
Yes, that was a bit of a curveball. There's specific mention of Vadim Chernov holding an honorary membership in something called the World Relations Commission for Justice, Peace, and Development, WRCJPD.
And that's based where?
In Quezon City, in the Philippines.
Okay. And what is this group?
Well, according to the source material, the group states its focuses include human rights and the environment. And it's associated with another entity called MetaMax Universal General Enterprises for Revenue Generation. It's just an interesting and somewhat unexpected international connection highlighted in the sources.
Definitely unexpected. And how does this link to the core technology or projects?
Well, this connection is presented in the context of exploring potential Philippine partners for pursuing granite oil exploration. Specifically, projects located in Siberia, interestingly enough.
Siberian granite oil involving Philippine partners. Why?
The sources frame it partly by the Philippines' own energy security needs. Their major Malampaya gas field is declining, so they're looking for new resources.
Okay, so potential partners are discussed.
Yes. The sources mention possibilities like PNOC Exploration Corporation, which is the state-owned company, and also PXP Energy, which holds Forum Energy Piomil.
But surely getting involved in Siberian energy projects right now, that must be complicated.
Extremely.
Yeah.
And the sources explicitly highlight these significant challenges for any Philippine companies considering it. Things like a lack of direct experience in deep granite exploration, the inherent geological complexity, and importantly, the huge geopolitical complexity.
You mean the Ukraine war and sanctions?
Exactly. They name the Ukraine war and Western sanctions on Russia as major hurdles.
So how do the sources suggest navigating that? It sounds almost impossible.
Well, what's fascinating here is the strategy suggested in the sources to deal with this complexity. They propose a kind of tripartite partnership, potentially involving Chinese firms.
Chinese firms.
Like who? Jiangsu Linyang Energy is mentioned as an example.
And what role would they play?
The idea presented is for Chinese firms to potentially take the lead on the financing and logistics side of things, and crucially to help mitigate the geopolitical risks because of their relationship with Russia. So using Chinese companies as a bridge, essentially.
That seems to be the suggestion. Maybe even using Chinese offices in Europe. One in Warsaw is mentioned as intermediaries to sort of buffer the direct involvement.
And the Philippines stance.
The sources note the Philippines' generally neutral stance in the current geopolitical climate as a factor that might potentially facilitate such complex partnerships.
So despite presenting these potentially immense resources, they cite figures like 1.86 billion barrels of proved reserves and a theoretical potential of 117.42 billion barrels in Siberia using these advanced techniques.
Which are massive numbers.
Huge. But despite that, the projects are consistently described in the sources themselves as being high risk, very high risk.
Requiring any company involved to really carefully weigh those potential benefits against the significant challenges. The geology, the need for massive financing, and this incredibly complex international geopolitical landscape.
Yeah. The core insight here, I think, is how these proposed projects, already tackling challenging geology, become deeply interwoven with highly complex international finance and geopolitics. It's not just about the tech.
Not at all. Which, given the truly ambitious nature of so many of the claims we've discussed, especially those broad predictive capabilities attributed to the algorithm across fields that have nothing to do with geology, it brings us back to a crucial point.
One that the sources themselves actually raise.
Yes, the absolute undeniable need for rigorous, independent scientific scrutiny and validation.
You really can't overstate that.
No. The materials we've reviewed, they rely very heavily on self-reported successes and claims of accuracy from the people involved.
And interestingly, even within the sources themselves, sometimes the data presented, well, it could be stronger. Some correlations shown have relatively low R-squared values, for instance.
Right, which is a statistical measure of how well the data fits the model. Low values basically underscore the point that more data, more robust analysis is needed.
So the sources themselves, to their credit in a way, seem to emphasize that independent scientific verification is key. Large-scale testing by external, unbiased parties is absolutely essential.
Essential to validate both the core geophysical method's performance at depth and maybe even more importantly, those really far-reaching claims made for the predictive algorithm, RALF-1.
Indeed. Validation seems paramount for everything discussed here.
Absolutely.
So that's our deep dive into this truly extraordinary stack of documents you shared with us. We've journeyed from a proposed geophysical technology claiming unprecedented depth and precision for sensing deep inside the Earth.
Even proposing remote sensing concepts for other planets like Mars.